So in this video, I'm going to show you how to make baby food that your babies and toddlers will absolutely love. So at the time I'm shooting this video, I have an almost 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, and the foods that I'm about to make and show you how to make go into their lunchbox every single weekday when they go to the babysitter's house, and they have no trouble eating them. So I just want to give you some tips and tools, because getting your kids to like to eat vegetables at a young age is just so important for setting a solid foundation for them, making them into a good eater, meaning they're able to eat a variety of foods as they grow into adulthood, and actually giving them a palate that's going to enjoy eating healthy foods as well. So in front of me, I've got kind of what I consider my staple baby food options that I'm making on a every 2 to 3 week basis. And I do make these in bulk quantities and I freeze them, and I'll show you how I do that in just a moment, which makes this whole process so much easier, because then you're only devoting an hour, if that, once every 2 to 3 weeks to make a lot of really healthy food for your kids. So the first thing I do is I like to pair butternut squash with beets. And you can find frozen beets. Sometimes they're a little more difficult to find in the frozen food aisle. But as you're probably getting a sense of, I always try to grab organic frozen vegetables, because that already right there saves you the prep of having to get fresh produce and peel everything and cut it up. This is very easy. It's already in a form that's ready to go. And again, I just want to emphasize how important it is to get organic every time if you can. With this particular beet, this is an organic beet, so my little bit of prep work in this is I'm going to have to peel the beet, dice it up, and then put it with the squash when I make it. So my combinations are butternut squash with beets, and then I tend to do what I call greens with bacon. So I do recommend doing a little bit of a tender green like spinach with a little bit of a coarser green like kale. Earthbound Farm also has a mixed super greens blend that's really nice as well. It's just that our local grocery store hasn't been carrying that lately, so I've had to kind of make my own blend using the spinach and the kale. And so I'll show you how I do this in just a moment, but I'm going to pair the greens with bacon. Doing that particular combination makes it really appealing to kids, because greens have more of a bitter flavor to them that can be a little bit of a turn off to youngsters, but when you put the bacon in there, there's a nice kind of salty, savory balance to that bitterness, and they'll eat that right up. The last combination I do are peas and carrots, and this is super easy because I can already find a frozen mix that has the peas and the carrots together. And so these are the 3 different baby food varieties we're going to be making this time. Okay, so let's start with making the baby greens, which was the package of 2 spinach and kale that I showed you earlier. So I'm just going to show you all 3 of those packets are in this cooking pot here. I've added some water and I've boiled it, and then I've strained the water out. And then I mentioned I pair that with bacon. So here I've pre-cooked the bacon. When you do this, you do want to leave the bacon grease in here. The first step to making these greens is I actually start with the bacon. Now you'll see I've got 5 pieces of bacon. Generally for 3 packages of greens, you could get away with 2 to 3 pieces of bacon. So I'm adding just a little extra, but know that you could actually use generally an entire packet of bacon for about 6 packages of greens. So bacon goes a long way with this. But what I'm gonna do first is just scrape all of this into my food processor. So I get the bacon in, and then as much as you can get the grease in there. Now I do recommend letting it come down to room temperature before you do this, partly because my food processor is plastic and I don't want to put super hot food in here and then start potentially leaching plastics into the food that my kids are going to be eating. So at this point, I'm actually going to blend this up to make the bacon small before I add the greens. That's really as much blending as you need to do right off the bat. Next, I'm going to take my greens, and again, I'm sure there's smoother ways to do this. I just am somewhat of an impatient cook, so I tend to just grab the whole pot and scrape these guys in. Again, just try to be careful. Often I make a mess doing this, and you know, that's perfectly fine. You can wipe it up. There's stuff spilling, but that's okay. So 3 packets is a nice amount, because that will fill up to close to the top of my food processor here. And that makes, you know, a good amount. You're using the whole food processor and getting as much baby food as you can in one shot. So at this point, I do recommend, beyond the bacon grease, adding a little bit of healthy fat. And I just want to note that anytime you're making homemade baby food, you want to add healthy fat. That's what makes these foods taste awesome to kids. And if you actually look at what's in commercial baby food at the grocery store, just pick up a jar next time you're in the grocery store. It's very, very rare that you actually see healthy fats added to those jars of baby food. And I think this is one of the reasons why kids don't like pureed vegetables, and well, fruits they do, but vegetables not as much, because they're very bland and they often just have pureed veggies and nothing else in there. So in our case, we are going to add healthy fat. That's going to make these greens and every other type of baby food I make taste really awesome. So for the greens, I recommend you either use a high quality olive oil or a high quality avocado oil. Both of those will taste good for this particular recipe. I'm just going to select the olive oil for today. And again, you don't need to measure. You do want to put a generous amount in there, because the more smooth you can make this puree, it should be kind of like a pudding almost in consistency, the more palatable it'll be to kids. So kids, I do find, like smoother textures to their foods, and especially with the greens, if there's a lot of broad leaves in there, they're probably not going to be as inclined to eat it as if it's actually well mixed up and it's more smooth. So kids are picky about flavors, kids are also picky about textures. So just know that the better you blend this, the better it's going to be for them. And I just want to kind of say again that my kids are 2 and 3, almost 2 and 3, and they will still eat pureed vegetables. They have no problem with that. So I want you to think outside the box as far as this only being for kids, you know, 12 to 18 months old. This is definitely something your child can continue to eat well into toddlerhood. Now I do recommend adding a little bit of supplemental high quality sea salt. The bacon will have that in there as well, but you know, again, adding a little salt is going to bring the flavor out in the baby food. And let me just show you real quick which bacon I use for this recipe. This Applegate Naturals is an uncured bacon that has no nitrates added to it. I feel like you can find this at most grocery stores. If you can't find this particular brand, try to find something very similar. Again, you always want to try to get high quality, no nitrates, no antibiotics, organic if you can. That's always going to be your best choice with bacon. So I just wanted to show that real quick. All right, so we are going to sprinkle a little sea salt into this particular blend here. That's probably good. And then again, I put the cover back on, lock it, and we're gonna pulse this to a nice consistency. Okay, let me just show you what this is looking like. At this point, this is probably pretty good. My kids will definitely eat it at this consistency. You could continue to pulse it and try to get even a smoother texture if you like. And then I'll show you shortly how we jar these and how we store these then. Okay, so for storing the baby greens, I do recommend using mason jars, glass for this. Always glass when you're storing food, whether it goes in the fridge or in the refrigerator, because glass does not leach, is not as likely to leach, I would say, into your food. And these are really nice sizes for kids, whether they're 12 months up to 3 years old. I tend to just go ahead and spoon it into the jar. You can fill it up to the top. When you put these in the freezer, the greens are not going to expand really too much, but that's a good amount right there. And then you could use the tin or aluminum lids that come with these jars, but I also do recommend, if you use a lot of mason jars and you're making a lot of your own food and putting it in mason jars, just investing in some plastic jars. They're a little bit more durable, they won't rust, a little easier to work with. So I like those. So you go ahead, just screw this on. So essentially I'm going to transfer my greens to jars, and then for the greens I'm going to be using this week for lunches, you could put, let's say you've got one child you're cooking for, I would put 2 to 3 in the refrigerator at a time and then store the rest in the freezer. Generally speaking, I pull these out the night before and they go in the lunch bag, and then by the time the kids go into the babysitters in the morning, the greens are fairly thawed and ready to go. Okay, so now let's make the beets and the squash. So since I'm using a whole beet that has not been pre-cooked and frozen, I do want to start with that. You can already see I've peeled and I've diced this particular beet. So what I'm going to do first is scrape this into my jar, like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little water. I'm going to boil it until it's fork tender, so I'll actually check it with a fork, make sure that it can pierce the beet flesh. At that point, I'm going to cut open the bags of the butternut squash, add those, give it another minute or two until the squash is no longer frozen, because remember, this will already be soft and it just needs to come down to a warm temperature. Then we're going to drain all that, and I'll show you what I do next to blend this in my food processor. Okay, so here we are with the beets and the squash. You can see that I've cooked them. They're soft, they're ready to puree. Now, again, we do want to select a healthy fat to add to this. This is going to make the flavor much more palatable for your children and make these taste great. So I do recommend coconut oil. The beets and the squash are a little bit sweeter, and they complement the coconut oil really nicely. So again, I don't really measure, but you want to be generous. You know, just I would say probably guesstimating 2-3 tablespoons potentially for this entire batch. And this coconut oil will melt right in once we puree the veggies here. And then again, adding some sea salt. You know, I always kind of guesstimate this, so, you know, sprinkling some in. And again, I'm gonna put this on, lock it, and what I would do is puree this until it has a nice smooth consistency. In this case, it should look like applesauce, or have that same consistency and texture once I'm done. And similar to the greens, once you've got this all ready, you're gonna go ahead and spoon it into the jars, put the lid on, and then either freeze or in the refrigerator. So for the last type of baby food I'm making, which is the peas and carrots blend, this is actually in some ways the simplest because everything's ready to go in these bags. I can put all 4 bags into this large pot, and then I add enough water to cover that, bring it to boiling, strain the water out, and then, like I've done previously, I'm going to add the peas and carrots to my food processor. And then for this particular blend, I do recommend using coconut oil again. Peas and carrots tend to be on the sweeter side, so they go really nicely with the coconut oil. But if you don't have that on hand, I think avocado oil would also work well for this. And then just be sure to use a generous sprinkle of sea salt. You're gonna blend that up. It should have a consistency similar to the beets and squash, where it'll be a little bit more like applesauce. And once that's ready to go, you're gonna put it in your mason jars and then go ahead and store it.